Heyo, what is up everyone? It is the Alpha J of the Alpha J Show, and after doing a lot of long videos, let's wind down with this video that honestly, I wasn't truly excited to make, but I feel like for my own sake, I have to make this, and a little part of me wants to make it. So this is probably the first video that technically blew up on my channel, if you count 3,000 views for a channel blowing up. It is also the last video on my channel in which I feel like I've had no style and did essentially a vanilla review, but I will get into that much later. That's not the true elephant in the room. So let's get into this revised review. So in the original video, I have the fatal flaw of equating my philosophy of cartoons having some resemblance of sense with the idea that cartoons having logic, which are two totally different things. Cartoons do not need logic, and I'm sure old me knew this. The problem lies in the issue of whether the root of a criticism lies in the fact that it doesn't make sense within the story because it ruins the intention, or the fact that it doesn't make sense within the story because it doesn't make any logical sense. To better clarify, if someone went to go and criticize the card that SpongeBob could have simply traded a card with Patrick to get the card he wanted because Patrick didn't care about the value of that specific card, but just having a card in general, well, that's a reasonable criticism. If someone would have criticized Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy, that Sandy could have taken her fursuit because Plankton didn't steal that, leading to a totally unnecessary and intentionally forced episode, that's also a reasonable criticism. If someone criticized the Splinter for not showing the gradual increase in swelling that SpongeBob would have received to a ludicrous amount towards the end of the episode, that is not a reasonable criticism. The first two, although rooted in logic in a sense, adjust their problems to the perspective of the episode. The last one is not adjusted to the logic of SpongeBob, but more the logic of real life. Whether the swelling grew or not does not change anything about the episode, except that it's more realistic in a show about an underwater talking sponge. And in my video, I seem to have issues with things that could simply be passed off as law of the show. The end of the episode where the sashers are being almost thrown into the water, I was more concerned with littering than how it would relate to the story, which was a fatal flaw. This is why I'm more forgiving with shows like Fanboy and Chum Chum, All Hail King Julian, and the Patrick the Game episode from SpongeBob, because within the rules they give, the episodes I reviewed seem to stay within them. So yes, this is a critique of the video in my review than the actual episode, but I want to show that I am self-aware and that this review is probably subjectively my worst in terms of hitting the mark, but I was less experienced then, and at least now I understand why. So let's get into some actual things to note about the episode. A running theme in the Mighty B videos is that the jump cuts to me seem lazy, and I never figured out why I had such a negative experience with them until now. The show reminds me a lot of shows like Tom and Jerry and Ren and Stimpy, two shows that stress the cartoonish pace and off-model wacky fast animation. The animation for this episode doesn't fit what it's trying to do. I know that the problem isn't the jump cuts, but more of how it relates to the overall picture. The episode went out of its way to not entertain children in a wacky adventure or comedic shenanigans. It went out of its way to poke fun at something that, at the end of the day, a child has a high chance of missing the point. It's similar to the fourth wall of Teen Titans Go in layers, because shows like Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Gumball, The Loud House, Steven Universe, these series have episodes with layers, whereas the fourth wall had the problem of a lack of perspective. The problem with this episode is that the message isn't suitable with the execution of the episode. The Mighty B has tools to poke fun at the ideal standard of women, but it isn't to do a semi-serious and layered parody disguised under a light-hearted and barely comedic taking. Like I say 2 years ago within the review, a better idea would have been to simply play to its over-the-top foundation and push the sides of too much structure and too little structures to the extremes. This leads back into the animation. The gaming equivalent to this is that if you were to play a gritty, army-influenced first-person shooter game, and in order to pick a lock you were given a Bejeweled 3 minigame, you know, that Match 3 game? Essentially, it's out of place for what the execution was going for. In layman's terms, the fast-paced animation isn't fit for what is a slowly structured story. It's not a simple story because it requires a few pillars to be set up, and the episode goes out of its way to show some of the least cartoonish things. Painting. Wow, the Looney Tunes pioneered the comedy of painting in a very realistic way with no jokes whatsoever. Open mic night. Wow. Tom and Jerry paved the road for having semi-realistic poems poking fun at people who do this. You see my point? I'm not saying that the general concept couldn't work with faster paced animation, because I said how it could work. I'm just saying that the faster animation doesn't work within within the show, because the sister episode to this is a really good episode and has absolutely nothing to do with having this semi-controversial added layer. My point is that the animation doesn't fit for the execution it's going for, and it leads to this episode feeling jarring and mediocre. I only want to briefly touch upon the execution of Hillary as a character. She is shown within the episode to be highly inconsistent with everything she's saying. I'm not sure if the episode is trying to tell me that people who want women to be free run the risk of making women more like themselves, or if that's a legitimate problem within the story. She wants Bessie to be free more than she wants Bessie to be herself, and yes, if you wanted Bessie's mom to ruin the group by injecting her morals of what a woman should be into it, it shouldn't be as contrived as to say, oh, I see things in here that society has deemed women's work. Now the entire club must go down. I'm sure people would equate your modern day social justice warrior to this, but that's not really the issue. The people who wrote this just seem to lack perspective on what exactly she's implying. Let's go over the facts within the universe of this show. Bessie and Portia are two totally different kinds of women who just so happen to be bonded over the interest of being a honeybee. If Hillary truly felt like all of the other honeybees were in danger of becoming the same person, then she doesn't know who her own damn daughter is. And that's the truth. I wish I emphasized this more in the review, but she signed her daughter up for a club without knowing exactly what it entails. Bessie on one hand appears happy, and she's shown to be an individual. Also, when did the honeybees say anything about not expressing individualism? Isn't the entire thing about becoming a more well-rounded and mature person? Aren't well-rounded and mature and independent people unique in their own right? They're self-aware to pursue their own interests and are the opposite of what you're fighting about. But I don't even need to go further. The fact that Bessie and Portia are two totally different characters fundamentally is enough of a case to say that Hillary's motivations were dumb from the get-go. I thought, and still do think, that Bessie was awesome in this episode. So that I don't read the same comment over and over, I want to say that majority of the picks at my video addresses that the episode was made to parody feminism or things of that nature. And now I do agree that within the video I don't take this into account, and I side with that piece of criticism. I should have known this, but I didn't at the time. However, knowing this does not make the episode any more enjoyable. It just makes the episode easier to understand in a critical point of view. I think looking at this as a parody makes it slightly more enjoyable, but if there's one thing you may know about my channel, parody doesn't substitute substance. The story of this episode is still pretty dumb, and to an outside viewer, or a child, like I said before, you can't reasonably expect that level out of them from the get-go. Said person would have to understand what feminism is, or something of that nature, and many people may not. If you like this episode and you're well aware that it's a parody, then don't let me stop you from enjoying this episode. There's a lot of things good about the episode, like the reasonable amount of pacing between the slower execution. I think the characters aside from Hillary seemed okay. The motivations for Bessie and the students weren't atrocious, but none of that had to do with the parody. A part of me wishes that the whole war on SJWs and how feminism is viewed on YouTube was put aside, and this episode can be viewed as itself in a vacuum to judge on its own merits, like I did at the time. I always look at an episode for what it is and what I believe it intended to do before I look at what the general consensus thinks. This is good for having my own genuine opinion, but I can and have ran the risk of making an unpopular opinion. It happens, but you can always be assured that I watch every episode without thinking of any backstage politics, like the episodes The Fourth Wall or Bye Bye Beavers. The episode directly makes connections with said off-camera influences. What I'm trying to say is that parody doesn't save this episode. It just makes what they're trying to do much more understandable. Now, like I said before, this was the last video in which I feel like I didn't have a style. And what I mean by vanilla review is that I feel like anyone could have made that review, anyone could have read that script. It doesn't necessarily have my style. But it was a very important review because that was the review in which I saw that people were engaging with me. It was at that point that I actually dropped doing gaming and music as a primary thing and made it into a secondary thing that I did quite often with gaming, never with music. It never really took off. And I saw that animation reviews was for me. For some weird reason, I never had a thumbnail for this particular review. My assumption was that people were mistaking my review for someone else's review, so I was just taking any views I can get at the time. As a small YouTuber, that seems to be the route that many people take. Also, around that time, I had the least amount of subs out of all the friends I had at that time. Although most of them were into gaming, I was the only one doing animation reviews at the time, and a lot of them really didn't see me growing per se. And if you were to see them now, none of them have cracked 500 subscribers. So I'll just leave it there and read the comments. I actually loved the Mighty B as a child, but yeah, some of the episodes weren't very good. I completely agree with you. I loved watching the Mighty B on Nickelodeon as a child, but looking back at it, there's actually a lot of episodes that really haven't held up over the years. Whereas if I watch something like Ed, Edd and Eddy or Foster's Home, for example, those still hold up. So I really don't know. It should be also noted, Boy Scouts also wear sashes to display achievements. In other words, calling it oppression by a male-run society is incorrect, and more along the line of egalitarian, as both Boy and Girl Scouts use them. Now, the thing about that is, I don't know if me and you, because you were writing this from the perspective of me back then, I don't know if we were both taking it too seriously. Now, you would think that the Mighty B would have a grasp, some sort of knowledge about Scouts, but no one really knows. I don't know, I didn't know then, so I'm not gonna say that you're looking too deeply into it, but I am gonna say even if you are right, or even if they're right, since cartoons are meant to entertain, it wouldn't make the episode more entertaining even if they did get that right. So computing and medical skills are sexist. Like I said before, I don't believe they are, and the episode kind of implies that, and that was kind of one of the things where it's really iffy that they chose those things, because computing is not necessarily a gender-specific skill. It's not like makeup, for example, that's leaning towards one gender more than another. I think all of your points are justified except the one about Hillary wanting Bessie to have fun. I think you may have missed her intention. Hillary disagreed with what the badge stood for, and seeing the girls already work so hard earning badges, she figured that instead of the calculated boring activities that they would do, they would have a free day to let loose and not have any rules. Hillary knows Bessie's personality. She's energetic, crazy, and an all-around goofball, so when she was doing all of the requirements for the Little Lady badge, Hillary pushed her to be more like the others and be the goofball that she usually is. My justification is a mess, but hopefully you get my point. You see, even if she did think that way, it's still a fatal flaw in her execution, because she never asks why. So if we were to go off that logic, she's still condescending to Bessie because she's not taking her input. She's assuming that she knows Bessie more than Bessie knows Bessie, which, when you look at it from that perspective, then you're looking at it from the perspective I was looking at it a year ago, where Bessie was trying to do her own thing by following the rules. And also there's the small fact that Hillary isn't necessarily a staff member, she's more volunteering for the leader, so it doesn't make her any better of a leader or a mother in that particular case. And that's pretty much it for comments. A lot of the comments are just telling me that I missed the point on the parody thing, and I already explained the parody parts. So if it seems like I'm skipping out on a lot of the comments, that's because number one, the comments are either that or they're actually talking about feminism, which I don't want to talk about on my channel. I review animation, and that's pretty much why I made this particular video, to talk about the animation in it and the story and everything that goes around that. I hope you guys enjoyed, and what do you think about my first review? Do you agree with what I said before? Maybe you disagreed before and you still disagree now, or maybe you could see my point a little bit better now. I'd love to know in the comments down below. Also, make sure to follow me at The ALPHAJ Show for the latest and greatest in 280 character content, and join my public Discord. I literally just got out of a voice chat today that was public. I'm doing them weekly now. I'm doing more of them and more frequently. But if you have any other review that you think I should make an extra discussion for, or maybe a new versus idea, or anything really at all, let me know in the request video. It's always in the description of all of my videos and in the card, so send all of your requests there. Just make sure to read the pinned tweet. If you really like this video, I highly suggest watching my catatonic review for more Mighty B videos. Make sure to subscribe and feel free to consider my Patreon. As always, I hope your time is well spent, and Alpha out.